hear me? Can you hear me? Oh, great. Okay. Thank you for inviting me to come and speak this afternoon as your keynote. I am truly honored. Thank you to U.S. for making sure my travels and stay are comfortable. For my presentations, I begin with song. If you are comfortable with this idea, I ask that you close your eyes and breathe deeply as I invite you to be present, inviting you to open your hearts and minds to the process of transformation that will bring about the alleviation of suffering for non-human animals and human beings. I hope we can all agree needs to happen. No more auction block for me. No more, no more, no more auction block for me. Many thousand gone. At the end of this talk, I will let you know why that song. I did my dissertation work at UC Davis, have been involved in animal advocacy for over a decade, and I probably don't need to tell you this, but I noticed the white elephant in the room over the past decade. Animal advocacy in the U.S. has homogeneous leadership with good-hearted intentions to alleviate suffering that non-human animals go through. But what impact does homogeneity have when DEI, or diversity, equity, inclusion, are absent? The problem is that you can have the best intentions in the world, but if you don't realize that your methods are homogeneous and exclusive, your results will have lower impact than you realize. And not just low impact, but often negative impact that makes the goal of getting more people to understand and or implement concepts like animal welfare or animal rights challenging. If you truly want to have a wider and positive impact, you must be open to critiquing the limits of leadership and organizational strategies that assume everyone is the same. And in the case of animal advocacy leadership, it is predominantly white, with assumptions that everyone comes from that racialized background. Now, there's nothing wrong or right about this identity. This is where a lot of the fear comes in when I start talking about diversity within the animal advocacy movement in the United States, if the recipients are largely white identified. They collectively start thinking that diversity and inclusion rhetoric is attacking them, when in fact, what I'm asking this demographic to do is to gain literacy around the meaning of their social/political identities within a system. The problem is that if you don't know the meaning of these identities in a society that privileges these over others, and you don't realize that these identities structure your consciousness around animal care, ethics, and social impact, then you aren't going to know that your approach to animal advocacy is not reaching its potential. Now, this is not about perfectionism or a simple binary of good versus bad person. I remind people we are on a continuum and a spectrum trying to bend that arch in the universe towards justice. I am a cisgender woman with able-bodied privilege in a heterosexual relationship. I'm keenly aware that all those identities are privileged identities within a system that lauds these, and I know that if I'm ignorant of that, The negative impact will be me upholding a system that advocates violence against transgender women and men, people living with disabilities, and people who do not identify as heterosexual. So diversity, what is it? How do you define diversity? Can you give an example of what diversity is? Where did you learn the meaning of this concept, diversity? Diversity is beyond simply race and gender. Diversity encompasses a wide range of identities and social experiences such as religion, age, ability, nationality, family situation, marital status, language, sexual orientation, race, ethnicity, and gender. Said that already, sorry about that. It's very important. However, I don't want to lose sight of the very real fact that Animal Expo is predominantly white. Animal Care Expo is predominantly white. If I asked you to start talking about diversity and identities, I'm sure I would hear many identities that you're acutely aware of that define who you are and how you navigate the world. When we start talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion and how it should be implemented in organizations or business models, it cannot be done randomly without understanding how these identities operate within the larger context of systems of privilege, power, and oppression. When some people think about diversity, they think about it as initiatives or programs found in schools or organizations rather than an actual discipline of study. Some people associate diversity when it comes to the identities of race and gender. Diversity has an expansive definition as applied to the human experience. But diversity is a practice that's literally rooted in discipline. It's like engineering, or if you were to pursue math, if you were to pursue sociology, it literally is a discipline. And that's one of the myths that need to be dispelled, that diversity just isn't something you look up in the dictionary and you do. It's literally rooted in methods and methodologies, a long history. And like I said, I emphasize DEI as a discipline because, truth be told, there is this limited understanding of diversity's intention. And diversity is also about how diverse experiences move organizations from one-dimensional to more multilateral ways, solving problems and creating effective hiring practices, marketing campaigns, better work climates, and successful activism. Many organizations and businesses understand diversity in terms of diverse communication styles, learning styles, work schedules. But once you start mentioning diversity in the context of factors such as race, things get a little difficult. In the case of animal advocacy, the focus on racial identity and systemic racism is virtually non-existent. And this is due to direct and implicit biases around what is and isn't diversity, what is or will not be a good return on investment if we do put our money into a diversity, equity, and inclusion program. Other challenges with diversity, more on the clarity of meaning and intent. I've noticed that if an animal advocacy organization wants to do diversity, a significant number think that just adding a person of color or two and expecting them to assimilate, which is a code word for you need to think white, is enough. And then they're disappointed that the person leaves or there's some inter-organizational conflict. This is actually cosmetic diversity versus structural change. Are you seeking to look diverse, or are you seeking to dismantle the foundations to bring about justice and equity? When you think about campaigns, marketing, grant making, etc., that you may have been involved in when it comes to animal advocacy, what does equality mean within the context of human beings? So that's all of the jargon. But what I actually do is I'm a writer. I write books. I'm a fiction writer and a nonfiction writer. And I take all this abstract critical theory and I put it into narrative called social fiction. And I have a book, my second book that came out called Scars. And it really brings all of these concepts to a college-age audience through a narrative book of 200 pages. So I want to share that skill with you through story. Equity versus equality. Diane was hired by Terra Garner Foods to help develop their new line of plant-based food products for both human beings and for dogs. A passionate vegan and animal rights activist herself, Diane was excited to take on the role of lead food scientist. As a mom of 5 rescued dogs who lived with she and her husband, she always felt uneasy that there could be so much love given to dogs as companion animals in the USA, yet other mammals such as pigs and cows with the capacity to feel and love, like her beloved dogs, were being killed to feed both humans and non-human animals such as cats and dogs. Let me just interrupt myself. Is there a reverb or is that just me hearing a reverb? Can people, okay. People can hear me clearly? Okay, thank you. Committed to the alleviation of suffering of all animals, she was excited to be recruited by Terra Garner, a rising star company in plant-based animal foods for humans and dogs. They had a sibling organization, a cozy place, a sanctuary for abused dogs that were solely fed Terra Garner Foods. Diane, an African-American woman, was the only non-white person working at the company. She had moved her family from Atlanta to work in Tarver, Wisconsin. On her first day commuting to work in a recently leased Mercedes, she was pulled over by the police under suspicion. Driving in a white gated community to get to Terra Garner, this was something she knew many Black people in the USA experienced. After finding nothing suspicious about her, the officer finally told her that he had pulled her over because she fit the description of a suspect who was stealing cars. She asked for the officer's badge number and called the police station after driving away. She asked if there were car thefts in the area that she had been driving, and the police officer on the phone told her, no, there were no car thefts, and there were no Black women who fit any profile. She arrived late to work, anxious and upset, but tried to compose herself and look professional. She had spent 10 years developing award-winning vegan products for Heaven Foods in Atlanta and was honored Terra Garner had recruited her to develop their new line. During the morning welcoming bagels and donuts gathering for her, she apologized to Henry, the VP of the department, for being late and explained that she had been pulled over by a police officer under suspicion and tried to express concern about her future commute and how it would be, and shared that her previous boyfriend 10 years ago had been mistaken for another person while walking in a similar type of community, taking a break from studying for his law school exams, and was shot by the police. He told her that she was perhaps being overly concerned and that things like that don't happen here, and also assured her that no one thinks she's suspicious just because she's Black. She dresses well. She speaks articulately and doesn't look like a threat. When her husband drives her to work one day the next week, they're pulled over by a different police officer in the same white and upper middle class neighborhood. This time under the claim that Miles, her husband, who was also Black, didn't use a blinker to indicate he was making a left turn. When Diane arrived to work late again, she explained to Henry that this had happened again and she was quite distraught and apologized for missing the morning meeting. Henry assured her that she had nothing to be distraught over, as he assured her that she and her husband couldn't possibly look suspicious, and said, "Isn't your husband a pediatrician?" He did suggest that she depart from home much earlier to avoid these situations of being late. He said he commutes 45 minutes early using Interstate 56, which is always heavy with traffic since road construction began 2 months earlier. A few minutes later, Diane was in the lounge to get her morning cup of tea and began filling the new mug her grandson had bought her with the Black Lives Matter logo on it. Lara, a colleague working in the same lab as Diane as an intern, commented, I have a cup like that except it says all lives matter. It's kind of all the same thing, you know? Lara's tone indicated she was irritated about the text on Diane's mug, despite giving her what appeared to be a sincere smile. Later that week, there was an all-staff meeting to discuss the marketing potential of their organic, high-protein, plant-based line of jerky sticks for dogs, Happy Sticks, as well as their new line of plant-based, high-protein sliced cheese for human consumption. Most of the staff agreed that they should target Whole Foods, Trader Joe's, or local natural stores as the premier site to sell both products. Nathan said, "There's one in every community, so that makes sense." It seemed like everyone nodded in agreement except for Diane. A red flag went off in Diane's head as she realized that such a statement came from an embodied site of privilege and access. It represented a collectivity of people who had grown up in similar white communities with easy access to the best health and nutritional products and services. It did not represent people who grew up food insecure or people who had the embodied experience of being Black, which meant that most likely, if you were Black, you had 90% chance of being lactose intolerant and would be more likely to purchase the cheese product because of that. It was also clear that they didn't realize that the same marginalized populations that were food insecure would also be challenged in accessing what they needed for their dogs to thrive. It was clear that even though there were good intentions, that everyone was a committed vegan or vegetarian concerned with animal rights at the company, their thought process was homogeneous. It was clear to Diane that Henry, Laura, and most others expected her to assimilate into the same homogeneous epistemological center. At the end of the meeting, Laura, Yvonne, and Henry revealed a poster they had designed for the marketing kickoff they were going to blast out on social media. It revealed a red-headed young woman, white woman, on a yoga mat holding a baby cow with a stack of Terra Garna cheese slices on the right of her, a puppy on her left eating from a bowl labeled Terra Garna, with a caption, "Don't take a slice of this calf's life. Take a slice of Terra because her life matters, because all lives matter." So let's go back to this notion of equality. And this relates to Diane's story, believe it or not. So the ideal of equal access is fundamental to the US democracy. So the 18th century notion that all men are created equal before God and before the law set up the powerful expectation that every citizen deserves the same opportunity to influence the course of democracy and to benefit from the fruits of a good society. But when a society is stratified into poles of advantage and disadvantage, with the inevitable consequences of privilege and exclusion, the promise of equal access to the discourse necessary for democratic participation rings hollow. Fair access, then, may take on a different meaning in each citizen, but its essence remains the interpretation of fairness as equal access and opportunity. So the problem is, we do not live in an all-level playing field because there is not enough focus on equity or understanding the consequences of inequitable systems in an era in which diversity rhetoric assumes, once again, we are all equal and on the same level playing field. So Diane's story is about what happens when both diversity and equality are misunderstood and misimplemented. What Terra Garner didn't understand was the deep fundamental differences between equality versus equity, and the assumptions made by Henry and other work colleagues were quite clear. Racial equity is a very difficult topic to discuss in terms of social justice, and like I said, it often gets confused with equality. Achieving greater racial equity means achieving greater justice. It means closing those gaps in our educational systems or justice systems, our job and capital markets, and so on. Inequity exists to the extent that a particular system or market does not perform equally for different groups on average. If mortgage applications, for example, are turned down disproportionately more for African Americans than for whites with identical applications, inequity in the mortgage system exists. The good news is because such systems are human-made, they can be changed in ways that achieve greater equity, and philanthropy can play a useful role. And this is from Stephen E. Mayer, PhD of Effective Communities. And I really appreciated what Dr. Mayer had to say about this. I think it's really important to think about equity in terms of systems. In the context of Diane's story, it's safe to say that most people engaged in animal rights, for example, enacted first and foremost through what they choose to buy or consume. However, in order to have those choices, we must have an equitable food system. There's a socio-historical reason why easier access to food is organized around the social identities of race, gender, and class. One needs to understand the inequities that have existed in not just the food system, but other systems, such as educational, healthcare, criminal justice, banking, financial. Diane's experience was not just cosmetic diversity. It was the expectation that she was equal to Henry and how she navigates the world, how she thinks about what matters, and the expectation that Diane's commute to work would be the same if she just left an hour early. The reality is that Diane is a Black woman and that racial profiling is real. The reality is that Henry is not told he is articulate or that he dresses nice for a white man. It's expected. The campaign All Lives Matter, though well-intended, assumes that everyone has attained full humanity within the context of the legal system, the health food system. It's an equal playing field. That's what's assumed. However, nothing could be further from the truth, as Diane's commute and Henry's commute tell a completely different story of inequities. That's Diane's position. Even as she and her husband commute to work, it will never be equal to Henry's as long as the system is inequitable. So I want to ask the audience a few questions to just consider. What do you think is the intention of Tara Gardner Foods? What was Henry's intention in giving advice to Diane about getting to work earlier? How do you think Diane feels about working at Tara Gardner, and are you surprised to hear that she left the position only after a few months? So, what happened with Diane's story were a few things occurring. One is this concept of implicit bias, unconscious attitudes and stereotypes toward individuals and social groups that affect our understanding, actions, and decisions. Implicit bias is this unconscious thought process, and it consists of networks of associations that we use to interpret information. Frames are used as a long-term strategy in often changing perceptions. Concepts or words such as inner city, thug, immigrant, model citizen are all part of the racial equality opportunity mainstream and national rhetoric and are undergirded by implicit bias. And what I wanted to note about Diane's story and the next story is that often when people are introduced to the lived experiences of Black people in the United States, it's from usually an urban setting, and I guess all Black people are poor. But if Black people just get to the point where they make it by getting an education, getting their degree, maybe even moving to a better location, then that means they've made it. These stories actually indicate something different, and I'm going to share with you this next story, and I hope we have enough time. This is the new one I've written for the purpose of the Animal Care Expo, to really dive into these concepts. It's called Lucy's Family Story, Impact of Inequitable Systems of Inclusive Animal Advocacy. So what kind of impedes inclusivity in animal advocacy? So let me bounce to my other app. You have to eat, Kai. Lucy places the small yellow bowl with minion characters in front of her 9-year-old son. Claire, his older sister, sits cross-legged in the corner of the rec room, head bobbing to a Beyonce song that she and the other 17-year-old girls at her high school say is poppin' fresh. Eyes bloodshot from a marathon of crying and sobbing since 3 a.m. Kai looks at his mother with the same zombie-like blank face he has had since last Tuesday. I look like a zombie too, she thinks to herself. She hears the dogs barking from afar, probably Maisie and Delia, 2 rescued pit bulls, playing with the new rescues, Bubbles and Tang, a brother and sister that Troy had taken out of a dumpster and had nurtured back to health at his veterinary practice in Oakland before bringing them to their family home in Petaluma, California, where they ran a small dog sanctuary for pit bulls. Their 3 acres of land in Marin County, where Petaluma was located, was purchased by them when Claire was not quite 2 years old, a bold move for a Black family who had been living in Oakland at the time. They had transformed it into a sanctuary after Lucy left her job 10 years ago. Last year, she and Troy had allowed Claire to fly out alone to Hartford, Connecticut to check out some universities and stay with Lucy's grandma, Opal, and grandpa, Dennis, during her spring break. It was very different from Marin County. When Claire returned back home to Petaluma, she couldn't stop talking about the miles of cement, how hard it was for great-grandma Opal to find fresh okra, how the local public high school had lost accreditation, and how great-grandpa said the police were shooting innocent black and brown kids for no reason. Claire, the daughter of a dog rescue couple, for her, the one thing that really stuck in her mind was that when great-grandpa and great-grandma needed medical attention for their 15-year-old Yorkie, there was no easy way to get there. Great-Uncle Luke and great-grandpa Dennis had to take public transportation for nearly 2 hours one way to get to a good vet. Luke had first recommended that Opal not waste her money and bring the dog to Lewis Tennant down the street, who was good with dogs. "You don't just take my baby to nobody who don't know what they doing," Claire had heard great-grandma Opal say while she was trying to sleep for the night on the living room sofa, while Opal, Dennis, and Luke were playing dominoes in the kitchen. "You know I would go with you, but my feet, Claire remembered her great-grandmother saying. Her swollen and sore feet from diabetes. It had always upset her great-grandfather. Now, he didn't blame her for it, of course, but was always upset that within 10 feet of leaving their housing complex, there were plenty of stores selling ho-hos, 50-cent bags of pork rinds, and malt liquor. But finding the fruits and vegetables that Opal grew up with in Jim Crow era of Mississippi before Dennis and she had left after her cousin had been lynched by the Klan was nearly impossible without needing to travel too far to some wealthier white enclave to get the food she had grown up with. Daughter of sharecroppers, even though her family was dirt poor, she and her 8 other siblings and parents cultivated the land and grew their own greens, their own okra, and some root vegetables. When Claire was 9, she remembered how her father explained that Opal and Dennis participated in the Great Black Migration north, leaving their small plot of cultivated land behind and into an industrialized city that was more free but still a struggle. Her new community that she would raise Lucy's mother and other siblings in was ripe for diabetes, obesity, high blood pressure, in tandem with a rise in a militarized police state, a law and order response to the rise of black civil rights activists who would not be silent about the lingering system of white supremacy that only made the USA the land of the free for those who could enter the whiteness club. The next morning, after Claire had heard her elders talking about how to care for Crispin, the Yorkie, who was weak for not having eaten for days, and they didn't know why, she asked her great-uncle why didn't they have a local vet down the street. In his usually snarky tone, great-uncle Luke answered her, "Does this look like Petaluma to you? Marin County? We had to go pretty far just to find your little tofu so your little vegan Oreo behind wouldn't starve when you came to visit. We're still treated as animals and worse than they treat their dogs." "Dogs are animals, Uncle Luke," Claire had told him. She remembered him rolling his eyes and saying, "You just don't understand, little cookie." When Claire returned from her trip, she decided that she would switch from her interest in pursuing engineering to veterinary medicine and said she wanted to one day have her own vet practice in Opal and Dennis's community in Hartford. Despite how their world in Petaluma had been turned upside down less than a week ago, this morning, Claire said she would open up that clinic and name it Sankofa, Twi language of Ghana, symbolizing a bird flying forward while looking backwards with an egg to symbolize the future. She had told Lucy, her mother, earlier that morning, that was his favorite name, you know. Kai bites his lower lip as Lucy urges him, "Please eat, baby boy." She lifts up a chunk of tempeh marinated in tamari sauce with a little bit of maple syrup. "Your favorite." "I don't want to eat without him, Mommy. We have to wait until he comes home for dinner, remember?" Gentle begins to wiggle in Kai's arms, slowly waking up from having taken a 30-minute nap. A German Shepard puppy, Gentle was Kai's partner in crime. Lucy's first memory of German Shepherds was not so gentle, kind, or loving. She was about 8 years old and was bored on a Saturday morning and decided to rummage through some old photos she had found in a box on top of the bookshelf in Opal and Dennis's living room. In the photos, there were Black people in the streets holding signs that said things like, "We shall overcome," and "All men are created equal." Some of the photos showed Black people who had fallen to the ground, policed with batons and German Shepherds. She would never forget the photo of a Black woman being mauled by a German Shepherd police dog. Uncle Luke had come into the room at the same time she was looking at the picture, turned to him in horror and asked, "What is this? Why is someone taking a picture? Why isn't someone helping her?" Luke ripped the photo out of her little hands and scolded her for picking at his things. "Pigs and their damn German Shepherds." But we fought. They loved those dogs like their own brothers. We were the animals. After hearing her brother raising his voice, chastising Lucy, Grandma Opal came in from the kitchen and scolded him. "She's a baby. Don't leave those around. This generation won't have those worries." "Opal, you can't protect her. This isn't the past. This will always be now," he had told her, and then went off to his bedroom where more boxes of photos were laid to rest from his days as a photographer in the South. Gentle looks up at Lucy with his warm black eye, the right one opaque and blind from being beaten by some teenager in Palo Alto, California. He had taken the puppy from his girlfriend to punish her after she had decided to break up with him. Claire's earphones increase in volume. Lucy squeezes Kai's shoulder with her left hand, the same mahogany brown color as her grandma Opal, the woman who had raised her and her 3 siblings after her mom had passed away after giving birth to Lucy in Hartford Hospital 42 years ago. Just before Lucy had received the phone call on Tuesday evening of last week, she had started reading Battle of Birth, Black Women in the Maternal Health Care Crisis. Christina, her older sister, had sent it as a gift in honor of her birthday and in memory of her mother's passing. Christina, a doula in Oakland, said she couldn't believe that Black maternal mortality was still the highest of any other racial group in the USA. She had emailed Lucy, quote, "It's 2018, not 1918. Still, Lulu, still. You should have gone into OBGYN instead of wasting your talent on those dogs." Troy had been looking over her shoulder at the email on Lucy's Chromebook. Shaking his head, he had commented, "She's still upset that you and I abandoned our people for the animals," air quoting abandoned as well. Lucy had replied in more seriousness, "Troy, we didn't abandon nobody. She was 10 when Mom died. She'll always need to imply that I should have turned Mom's death into a lifelong fight for maternal health care to make sure she didn't die in vain." Troy rolled his eyes and mouthed, "She's got issues," and then walked away. "Turn it down, it's too loud and you know that," Lucy finally yells to her daughter across the rec room. Kai jerks his body in surprise, startled by his mother's usually calm voice being replaced by what he had recently dubbed the Klingon voice, whenever she'd occasionally become too angry to maintain her soothing tone. Looking at his mother, Kai whispers, "We're not supposed to yell. I'm going to tell Daddy when he comes home for dinner that you used your Klingon voice. Daddy never yells." "You're right, Kai. You're right. We shouldn't yell," she tells him, sitting next to him on the green IKEA convertible sofa, putting her arm around him and then drawing him close. His body starts to shudder lightly again. She knows more crying will come in the next minute. Claire sits in the corner listening to Formation by Beyonce since 8:30 that morning. Finally, Claire looks up at her mother, mouths, "Sorry," and then turns the volume down. She goes back to the letters in the homemade denim fabric messenger bag Lucy had sewn for herself to carry her dissertation work, notes, and books focused on Michael Vick. She had carried it from her university program to Precious Paws 11 years ago, the nonprofit dog advocacy organization she had been working for, and thought it was eerie to see Lucy using it to now hold her college acceptance letters. On the evening back in 2007, Troy had come home to find Lucy crying inside of the gazebo. Claire was at a slumber party a few houses down. Lucy was pounding her fists on the gazebo seats, knees on the floor. "What am I doing? What am I doing?" over and over again. "Baby, are you two okay?" he had asked, scrambling to the floor to help her up, putting his arm around her to try to get her from off the floor. She resisted. "We're okay. But isn't this where we belong, Troy? On the damn floor? On all fours because we are just so below them? Because only white people know how to be civilized when it comes to how devoted they are to dogs. these saviors. I guess we're just the savages waiting to maybe get the same unconditional love they give to their dogs and their family. We'll never be part of their family. He interrupts her. Calm down, Lulu. What happened? What are you talking about? Finally, she allowed him to raise her to her feet, and he embraced her. Let's sit down, Lulu, and guided her to a bench with cushions on the other side of the gazebo. After about a minute or two of them sitting with each other, breathing deeply in their bellies, remembering their mindfulness breathing exercises they had learned at the East Bay Meditation Center in Oakland, Lucy was ready. She leaned over to pick up the denim messenger bag she had made, opened it, and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper, and then handed it to him. Troy had raised his eyebrows in curiosity, then looked down at it. Touching his caramel brown and smoothly shaven face, she whispered, "Open it." His hazel brown eyes focused on images of Michael Vick splayed all over the paper with a caption bubble coming out of his mouth with the words written on it. "I'm the spook that keeps your dogs up at night." At the bottom of the paper in bold fonts was, "Euthanize Michael Vick, euthanize rap and gangsta culture, euthanize all of them. Your dog will thank you." Troy looked at her in confusion. "Why did you print this out?" She shook her head. "I didn't. It was posted on the community bulletin board at Precious Paws, and some folk had a copy pinned to their cubicle walls. Maybe 20 of them had done it out of the 31 of us." She began to blink her left eye rapidly, 8 times in a row. It was her pantomime that revealed she had been or done something she probably would be regretting soon. "Oh no, Lulu, what did you do?" Troy asked. Sam, Luke, David, Tristan, and Patty were laughing when I entered the community room. I asked them what they were laughing about, and they got real quiet. Patty was like, "Oh, well, just some little thing." And then Sam interrupts her and says that his brother at a rescue shelter in Portland, Maine, created the meme and emailed it to him. Sam said he decided he should post it on the community board to show solidarity with those doing dog rescue. And then Luke sees the look of disgust on my face and rolls his eye, and he's like, "Here it comes." And I lose it, Troy. I'm like, "Where what comes, Luke?" And I lost it. I started yelling at him, all of them, that no one in the entire place except for me is even vegetarian, that they had the audacity to attend that fundraiser in San Francisco 2 weeks ago, hosted by Whitmore. You know, the famous white chef who absolutely loves his dogs and raised money for his favorite animal shelter in San Francisco every year at this event. And I'm like, the same chef who owns a boutique butcher shop with lessons on how to butcher lambs? You know, the same chef who owns a 5-star restaurant that mostly wealthy white people can only afford in Manhattan to eat lobsters that he boils alive and has had people of color file complaints about how they've been discriminated against? He boils them alive, Troy. You know, the same chef Whitmore that was arrested but only spent a night in jail after his girlfriend called the police for hitting her 10 years ago? And then they all gang up on me and tell me I'm too sensitive, and they work at Precious Paws for dogs, not lobsters, that nobody cares about lobsters. Troy shook his head and repeated, "What'd you do, Lulu?" She took another piece of paper out of her messenger bag and handed it to him. He unfolded it. Chef Marcus Till Whitmore's photo on the middle, the meme text printed out in all caps, bold Palatino font. Euthanize Chef Marcus Till Whitmore. Euthanize white foodie culture. Euthanize toxic white masculinity. Domestic abuse victims, Black people, and lobsters will thank you. Troy did a face palm. "Oh, you didn't," and then shook his head. "Oh, I did, and I sent it to the entire listserv and the board members because they went to that event too, Troy. They all attended that fundraiser and left me behind in my cubicle as I silently protested." Troy shifted the weight of his 210-pound, 6'3" muscular body. "And?" he asked her. Sam complained HR took his side after he claimed it was traumatizing to receive it, and they didn't care about my take. I told them that when you're referring to Vic as a spook, it's racist. But Debbie and Sam assured me that the dictionary definition of spook is a ghost, and Sam said he had never heard of that before, and that a spook when he was growing up is a ghost or apparition. They told me I needed to work with HR to issue a formal apology to everyone. I told them no. I quit, Troy. 3 years of these racial microaggressions? She interrupted herself, sobbing. Troy stood up, kneeled in front of his crying wife, then placed his 2 hands on her swollen 6-month pregnant belly as she murmured through sobs. "What am I doing? What are we doing? What will his future be?" She laid her hand on top of his, and he took her hand and said, "I promise, baby, I will protect him. No one is gonna hurt him. Kai is love. Always remember that, Lulu. Kai is love and won't be nobody's spook." Okay, change of scene to the present. "It's almost dark, Mommy. Do you think he'll be home soon? It's almost dinner time. We were supposed to make those vegan cupcakes together, and then he and I are supposed to give Gentle a bath," Kai whispers. She presses her cheek against his and feels his tears silently fall into hers. Claire finally stands up, stretches, and takes her headphones off. Lucy was about to ask her, "How can you be so focused on those letters right now?" Like she had asked her yesterday when she was looking through her college acceptance letters and doing more internet research to make a decision among her final 3 choices: Trinity College, UC Davis, or UC Berkeley. Claire moves a little closer to Lucy and Kai, sitting on a zafu across from them. When she wasn't listening to Beyonce or looking at her letters, she had dedicated her time to sitting zazen, Zen Buddhist breathing meditation she had been doing on a daily basis since Troy had introduced it to her at the age of 6. Kai never expressed that much interest in it, but for Claire, Buddhist Bay Area Black women like Reverend Earthlyn Manuel and Reverend Angela Kyoto Williams had made the tradition of Buddhism more radical and race-conscious for young Black girls like Claire, trying to make sense of the rise of hate, fear, and preemptive strike and anger towards people who looked like her and the members of her family. One night when she had gone to the bathroom in the wee hours of the morning, and while heading back to her bedroom, she noticed the living room light was on. She crept in to take a look and saw her father sitting on the hard cushion he had always sat on. He had called it zazen. She asked why he wasn't sleeping. He opened his eyes, sitting in full lotus, and had replied, "I'm very angry right now, Claire, and I'm trying to breathe through it and forgive, but it's hard. You know, sometimes it's hard. I spent all day in surgery trying to save the life of this greyhound named Tippy." "Did you, Daddy?" "I did. That's why I didn't come home until after dinner and until you were in bed." "Then why are you angry?" Claire asked him, sitting beside him. "Someone did something really bad to Tippy because they didn't like that Tippy's caretakers were living in their neighborhood in Pacific Grove. This man thought only people that looked like him should live there, people in the neighborhood. Well, they all knew something was not right about him because he collects this stuff from a bad time that happened in a faraway place called Germany. Sometimes it's hard for me to just sit, but I have to." "Oh," she had replied and took her father's hand. "Can I sit with you too, Daddy? Sometimes I get angry too." With a tired smile, he nodded, and Claire sat full lotus next to him. Back to the present. Lucy sighs. She had finally put Kai to bed after getting him to eat a small bite of the tempeh. Claire had left the rec room and was in her bedroom, probably still distracting herself with acceptance letters. Lucy takes one more look at her iPad that she had propped up on her desk in her office. She bites her lower lip, lets out a deep breath, stands up, and goes to the bathroom to get ready for bed. And this is kind of a scene. This is more like a play. So on her iPad, she has the website, the Oakland Tribune, up, and the headline is, "Oakland Community Mourns the Death of Dr. Troy Frederick Freeman." Oakland community mourns the death of Dr. Troy Frederick Freeman, who passed away from a heart attack at the untimely age of 47. Colleagues in the community were shocked, noting that Dr. Freeman had seemed vibrant and healthy that morning. "I think he died from a broken heart," his brother Philip was quoted saying. "A lot of people didn't know, but my brother dealt with a lot of pain living in this country as a Black man. But because he wore doctor's scrubs and had his degree, people just assumed he was okay. Things would happen, people would say things to him, make assumptions, and he'd just smile and try to hold them with compassion. A few weeks ago, he told this one woman dissatisfied with the treatment of her dog when he was out in Sonoma helping at a clinic. He told me that she called him the N-word when he intervened between her and a white doctor who were in a heated argument. He was in regular clothes, not in his scrubs, and she said, 'N-word, mind your own damn business.' And I asked him, 'Man, what'd you say?' And he joked back, shaking his head. 'I said, as the surgeon here for the day, it's Dr. N-word, mind your damn business.' He was always about jokes. But I think those jokes were there to mask the pain he was feeling. There's just so much pain that we can take, And that's the end of the story. Just gonna sit with it and breathe. So that was a very challenging story for me to write, and it is fiction that's based on reality. Important for me to note once again, as someone who comes from a background where I am highly educated and in a society that values titles and positions in terms of your job, I made it. And for Lucy's family, still, society was not inclusive enough for them, and you probably recognize that in those different snippets in the start of really understanding these histories that kind of linger, even though her great-grandparents were sharecroppers, even though her mother and her were born and raised and grew up in Hartford, Connecticut, and then she and her husband are somehow out in one of the whitest and wealthiest counties in the United States, Marin County in California. And still, you kind of see that happening and what's occurring within their own animal advocacy work. The conflict, the tensions of being Black people doing this work, and an advocacy, a movement that does not understand what true inclusivity means and does not understand what white supremacist racial caste system that this USA is means. So there's this talk about diversity in the USA. And diversity can only get you so far, as we saw with Diane and Lucy's story. And I asked people here to start thinking about equity and inclusivity. However, to get to the point of being highly inclusive, this is contingent upon moving towards an equitable system, as I said before, for societies such as the USA that are incredibly inequitable. Diversity, equity, and inclusion work is expansive, and I must make it clear that my framing of diversity, equity, and inclusion within animal advocacy focused primarily on racial equity because the United States is a white settler nation. It was built and founded upon white supremacist racial caste system. So many professional diversity, equity, and inclusion trainers try to skirt around this issue. We can't start making fundamental changes if we cannot name the system for what it is first. I remember I was asked to give a talk at a sanctuary in North California 8 years ago. They wanted me to talk about diversity and animal rights. I sent them my title, which clearly stated that I'd be talking about confronting whiteness in the movement. They wrote back a few days later and asked that I consider 4 alternative titles that I had outside of what I had presented to them. When I looked at the alternatives, all 4 titles had whiteness removed from them. When I asked them why, they said they were worried about making the audience feel uncomfortable. I wrote back and told them I wasn't taking it out because how else are you going to solve the problem if you can't start naming the white elephant in the room? So they kept it. I spoke. And you know what? The mostly white audience were fine. And you know what? Discomfort is absolutely normal when one wants to go through a process of transformation for the better. I remind people that change is not supposed to be comfortable, and that generally, white people in the USA aren't used to talking about race or their racial identity being named as a racial identity, because that is how most white people in the United States are thinking about and trained to think about race. Race happens to others, not me. If I talk about race in a post-civil rights era, that's racist, apparently. But that doesn't make an inclusive movement, now does it? Also, just because a person of color made it in terms of perhaps graduating from a top-tier college or becomes a veterinarian or owns their own business within a predominantly white sector, it doesn't mean the USA is now equitable or inclusive. You need metrics and assessment to truly determine if we are inclusive, and if not, what are the top impediments to this inclusivity? I realize I didn't go to the next slide. My apologies. Looking at my own slides, I'm like, why aren't people following? So I refer to the UC Berkeley Haas's Institute for a Fair and Just Society. Each year they release an inclusivity index report for a plethora of countries throughout the world, including the USA. Inclusiveness index for the USA reflects reflected by the Haas Institute, determines what the most relevant factors are in creating either a marginal or inclusive society. So instead of focusing on individuals, they have focused primarily on the effects of a Trump administration over the last 1.5 years. In particular, this comprehensive report explains that there is a certain configuration of white supremacy that manifests as the following. So these are the key points that really determine how inclusive the United States is. They've seen that there's a rise in white nationalism. They've seen that there's a negative impact because of the Muslim ban, Muslim countries, overturning of DACA, building a wall on Mexico's border within the USA, or on the Mexican-USA border, and the increased ICE raids in the workplace. And I cannot stress enough that these are all rooted in what happened 500 years ago on the auction block. The creation of this nation by stealing land, by creating genocide of the indigenous population, by stealing black people from countries in Africa and enslaving them, selling them on the auction block to create a white supremacist racial caste system that fed into the development of a capitalist economy and really fed in creating the physical, the geography, the change of land, creating the United States the way it is today. So this inclusivity index, it's on a continuum of these systems of oppression that are rooted in the auction block. That's why I started off with the song, The Auction Block. And I don't know how much time I have, but I'm going to try to do this very quickly because I've told several people, I usually do this in 6 hours and I'm doing it in an hour. So it's a lot of information and a lot of things thrown at you. You're not supposed to get everything instantly. It's just to kind of plant seeds, take notes. So back in 2004, I had transitioned into veganism and noticed that there were not many people of color that were visible in both the animal rights and vegan movement. I come back from, I have a background from Black feminist theory, and I learned that Black women share a unique experience of living through and navigating through a society that's racist, classist, sexist, etc. Now, I created this book called Sistah Vegan, which called for the voices of Black women vegans. The first of its kind in 2010, it would interrogate how race and gender influence the ways we practice veganism and our animal rights. Now, seeking a publisher had been difficult. No one wanted to take the book project. There was misunderstanding of what race means and how that would or could affect how one comes to their animal rights or vegan practice. There was the collective mainstream notion amongst white-identified people in the United States that, like I said before, talking about race must mean you're racist or you're being divisive. And I tried to explain, well, the animal rights movement is not immune to this. The book was published, and my intention was received as divisive by many and distracting. But the impact was actually the opposite. My project's result parallel the critical race legal studies and critical race behavioral studies data that show how Black people have differing relationship to the system than the white status quo. And it was similar to Diane's and Lucy's family's experiences. Many, like myself, had not considered animal rights in my younger days because the message from the mainstream was that the socio-historical context of our Black experience, collectively shaped by systemic racism and white supremacy, did not matter. We were expected to assimilate into animal rights as if we were all equals, but that problem with the equality rhetoric, of course, is that even though it has a good intention, if it's enshrouded around one-dimensional frameworks, then the impact is negative. The negative impact being that what is lost is the potential for marginalized communities to, one, becoming fully thriving animal advocates, and two, the potential for those mostly white-identified people with the most power in animal advocacy to literally change the system from inequitable to equitable. Because I decided to engage in diverse and inclusive ways to approach animal rights, the result was not only the Sistah Vegan book, but many marginalized people have contacted me over the last 10 years telling me that there was no way they would have considered animals rights if they had not read Sistah Vegan, a book that spoke about the realities of race and prejudice in this country. The book project was a double win for anti-racism and animal rights, as well as for Lantern Books, who invested in diversity and inclusion by taking on the book project. Over the last 7 years since its publication, many mainstream animal advocacy and/or vegan-oriented businesses or groups have contacted me, letting me know that after reading Sistah Vegan, it really helped them understand why and how racial equity and inclusion are important, and that projects focused on fusions of racial equity, anti-racism, and animal rights open up countless opportunities. And they admitted that at first, many in their group were scared, had reservations, thought such an approach would be divisive and take away focus from the animals. They would have never known this had they not been open to realizing how diverse and inclusive perspectives are making more productive and holistic animal rights and vegan strategies. And for many, the book had been a guide that can be used in most white-dominated spaces, such as trying to discuss the whiteness of the USA Buddhist Sangha movement and its collective silence around whiteness, privilege, and what it means to build a Buddhist movement on stolen land, cultivated and built by enslaved non-white people. So, the title of this talk is Radical Diversity, Equity, Inclusion. This is intentional because I want everyone here to start getting radical about diversity, equity, and inclusion. To go beyond passivity and to actively create change, get out of your comfort zone, operationalize change within your organization, as well as outside of your professional lives. So you're probably asking, well, how do I do that, Dr. Harper? For one, attending this session is a good start, but I gently remind people that this system of inequities took 500 years to build, within the context of the USA, at least. Diversity, equity, and inclusion work is on a spectrum and a continuum, as I had mentioned before. You are always working towards creating a planet with less inequities and suffering. There is no end. It's a continuum. One resource I like to suggest is to download the Vegan Praxis of Black Lives Matter conference to better understand intersections of animal advocacy and anti-racism as applied to the types of racial inequities mentioned in Diane and Lucy's stories. This was a 2-day-long conference with 17 speakers that I organized 3 years ago. Another is to start developing a racial equity toolkit, which will move you into literally operationalizing racial equity. This also is a great blueprint for other inequities you may want to address, such as issues around gender, class, ability, and immigration status. So a racial equity toolkit for animal advocacy. Oh, I spelled that wrong, my apologies. So how to operationalize racial equity into your organization or business, using a non-missionary approach, becoming allies and being in solidarity with non-human animals and being part of the solution to dismantling a racially inequitable system, and breaking away from cosmetic diversity. So my LLC, Critical Diversity Solutions, a specialty boutique strategic consulting firm, helps organizations and businesses with animal advocacy and/or vegan, vegetarian philosophies in mind to move forward with a radical diversity, equity, and inclusion plan that doesn't distract or take away from the non-human animals we are helping. That information will be at the end of this talk if you want to learn more, and I'll be at booth 500 at around 6 p.m. if you want to talk more about how this content from this talk can apply to your specific DE&I initiatives needs. So there is no unique one plan, there's no one plan fits all. I listen to organizations. I've worked with organizations like Farm Sanctuary, animal charity evaluators. I went to give a talk at PetSmart Charities last fall. I do lots of work with universities, and I just get people started. And what I hold is I'm very compassionate, and I don't do individual shaming. I talk about systems, and I talk about spectrums and continuums, because I, over the course of my work, have noticed probably about 10 years ago, the shift of going from, it's either a bad or a good person. You're a racist or you're not racist. You're in it with us, with the animals, or you're not. That shift away from the binary thinking and start thinking in spectrums and continuums, being compassionate with one another, and stepping into what would be considered first a discomfort zone, but realizing that these zones are zones of transformation and opportunity. And that these things are scary because you're not used to it, but just think about all the things you've done in your life that, wow, that was really scary, but I'm glad I gave it a try. And I don't know how my life would have been if I had not opened my heart and my mind to the possibilities that what I thought was going to hurt me, that I thought was going to be an impediment, was actually something that opened up my way of understanding possibilities around justice for non-human animals and human beings. So, I wanted to end with song, because I began with song. And like I said, I started with the auction block because I'm a critical race materialist, which means I analyze the meaning applied to objects so we can discover what they can tell us about the racial power dynamics in this country. And like I said before, the auction block represents ante-bellum slavery in the USA. It represents an entire system built on white supremacist, racial, caste, and capitalist system. Human beings were sold, and we all experience the consequences and privileges, depending who you are, of what took place on that auction block, even now in 2018. The auction block represents plantation politics and represents that the arrangement of people and resources on that plantation literally arranged this nation's consciousness and their thought process about who belongs, who deserves to be given human rights, and who deserves to be treated, quote unquote, as an animal. And that's very loaded, I know. But that's from the context of colonialism and how animals were not even seen as beings that have the capacity to feel and love. This last part is important because in the colonial context, black people were animalized to justify their enslavement, while white men were given the privilege of being legally and religiously recognized as fully human, starting 500 years ago. And parallel to this, this new white settler nation depended on the exploitation and use of non-human animals that were sold too, on auction blocks. And in 2018, continued to be treated as commodified objects, ranging from puppy mills to butcher blocks, baby cows being separated from their mothers so they too can be consumed for human pleasure. And Lucy's family epitomizes how their human and non-human families still struggle against the devastation of the auction block. So I'm going to end with song. We will not bow down to racism. We will not bow down to injustice. We will not bow down to exploitation. I'm gonna stand. I'm gonna stand. Thank you. Thank you. And you can contact me for resources or questions at my email, breeze@criticaldiversitysolutions.com. And I'll be at booth 500 for more questions and a book signing of my book, Sistah Vegan. Okay, thank you.